Hey there, I'm Kat, and this is Brews and Reviews. In today's video, I'm going to wrap up all the books that I read in May. A lot of the books that I read this month were for the Spoonies Readathon, which was a readathon I was co-hosting with Emily from Novelle Novels. So a lot of these books that I'm going to be talking about today have disability representation of some sort. Let's get straight into this. So the first book I read in May is A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol. This is a middle grade book about a young autistic girl, and at school she starts learning about her town's history and how there were women who were burned as witches, and she starts associating with them because they were defined as witches because they were different and she's different, so she forms this kind of attachment with them, and she starts campaigning to have them recognised and have a memorial put up. That side of the story was really interesting to me. Elle McNichol is autistic, I'm autistic, so this was a really interesting read, but I did find it quite difficult because it's kind of like all of the people around this main character, apart from her family, or sometimes her family, are just like the worst people that you could be around as an autistic person. It was like they all had the worst opinions of autistic people and came at her for them, and it was really hard to read from that aspect because I personally didn't have a very similar experience to that because I didn't know I was autistic when I was younger, and I don't know, it's a really weird one because I couldn't really relate to it, but I know a lot of people can relate to it, and a lot of people are bullied because they're autistic, so I don't know, it was really interesting and a different perspective for me to consider, but I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars, and I definitely would recommend it. I just feel like if you're autistic, then you might find it particularly difficult if you have experienced that, or even if you haven't, because, you know, it's just, God, these are the worst people. The worst people. Then next up I did a buddy read with Emily from Novelle Novels, and we read Percy Jackson and the Son of Neptune. This is the second book in the Heroes of Olympus series, and I loved it. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and it was really welcome because on my reread of The Lost Hero I didn't really like it. I just found it kind of a drag, and this one was much better. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. I don't really want to say what it's about, but Percy's in this one, so it immediately made it better for me because I just really enjoyed Percy's tone of voice, and I like the other perspective characters of Frank and Hazel in this one. I just feel like they made up a more well-rounded team, and I like their, I don't know, godly stories a little bit more. I just think they're more interesting generally, so I'm really excited to read the next one. I'm going to be reading that one in June, and yeah, this one, really enjoyed it. Then next up I read Mooncakes by Suzanne Walker. This is a graphic novel about a deaf witch who lives with her grandmas, and she goes out because there's like a magical disturbance in the forest, and she ends up bumping into her childhood crush, who is a werewolf, I believe, a shifter, a werewolf, can't remember exactly which one it is. They turn into a wolf, and without spoiling anything, there's some dodgy magical things happening, and they have to sort of team up together and try and figure out how to stop bad things from happening. It's very cute. I really enjoyed the deaf representation in this one. I feel like it was done in such a way that while it impacted the main character, all of the characters in there had come up with the ways to make magic accessible to her. She does a lot of non-verbal spells, and I just think it was really interesting how that was portrayed. And yeah, I really liked it, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then next up, I took on the mammoth task of reading the tandem read of Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn. These are books 6 and 7 in the Throne of Glass series, and they do take place at the same time. So some crazy person out there decided it'd be a good idea to match up exactly when things were happening here and things were happening here, and you switch chapters between the books as you're going. And turns out that's really a good way to read it, but also just really difficult. It's a lot more brain power than just reading them separately. And I would also say that I probably wouldn't do the tandem read again. While I enjoyed reading it as a whole, I just feel like both of the atmospheres of the books was kind of lessened by the fact that you were switching between them, because I feel like Empire of Storms has a very bam 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 non-stop action, wow, oh my god, all the things are happening atmosphere, whereas Tower of Dawn is kind of let's just be chill for a bit. Let's just have a softer atmosphere, a healing balm, and then obviously some things happen that are yeah, but also much more chill. So I probably would read it not tandem next time that I decide to reread this series. But I really enjoyed them. I gave Empire of Storms 5 out of 5 stars, and I actually increased Tower of Dawn to 4.5 out of 5 stars because it turns out I really like that book. No one's more surprised than me. Kale. Then next up I read Lycanthropy and Other Chronic Illnesses. This one is a book that I for some reason thought was a contemporary book, despite the fact that it has lycanthropy in the title. I really thought that was a pun, did not make the connection that it was not a pun, and did in fact include werewolves. So this book is about a woman who got bitten by a tick and got Lyme disease, and it's like a year after, and she hasn't fully recovered from her Lyme disease. She's going to be battling that forever, and her life has sort of been derailed because she was in medical school and she kind of had to like take time off, and she's living with her family again. And in the beginning of the book, her and a friend of hers that she met online, they start this like disability chat with other disabled folks. That's my favorite bit about the entire book, is all the discussions that take place in that disability chat, because everyone is so understanding. And I feel like unless you have like a chronic illness or a disability, then you can't really like, you can understand someone, but you can't understand someone. You haven't felt the same things, and it's a really weird perspective, and it's a really weird thing because when you're a spoonie talking to other spoonies, it's like, oh, you just get it. You just know what I'm talking about. When I say, oh god, I'm so fatigued, and people say, oh, just go get some more sleep then. And you're like, that's not the problem. I could sleep for a whole day and still be fatigued, because that's not why I'm fatigued. I'm not tired, I'm fatigued. Anyway, there's just like a whole thing. It's very relatable, and I really, really enjoyed that part of the book. And then there's like a whole wild actual werewolf thing to it. I kind of found the reason for the werewolf thing kind of obvious, and I can't really explain why without being like, this is the twist of the book, because you don't find out until the end. But I don't know, I just made a connection and I was like, that's the answer, isn't it? And I was correct. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I will say that the main character is Southeast Asian, as is her family, and I've seen on Goodreads that Southeast Asian reviewers have said it's not great representation of that, so I would be wary of that going into this. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars, mostly for that whole disability chat representation thing, because that just really hit me where it hurts. So then I read The Secret of Haven Point. This is a middle grade fantasy book about a group of kids that have ended up in a lighthouse, and they have this sort of little society where they do wreckings, where they essentially collect stuff that has come off of ships. They're bad ships, so the mermaids say. There are mermaids in this book also. I would say that the disability representation in this book is really, really good, and if you like middle grade, I think you'll like this book. I am not a big fan of middle grade, so I personally didn't like that it was written from a child's point of view, and that's probably because I just get really annoyed by children who think that they know everything, because I'm just like, oh my god, children. So I think that's like a personal gripe, and I can't really blame the book for that, because the things that annoy me probably make it endearing to other people. So I ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars, but I definitely recommend seeing what Emily from Novel Novels and Chatty the Mad Chatter say about this book, because I think it's really interesting, and I feel like if you like middle grade, their perspective makes more sense than mine. Then I picked up The Invisible Kingdom, Reimagining Chronic Illness by Megan O'Rourke. This one is a non-fiction book about this woman's experience with chronic illness and the journey that she went on to try and figure out what her chronic illness was and what was happening within her body. And I felt like this book was a really, really interesting one. There were so many parts of this that just jumped out at me. If I had this book physically, I would have annotated it, and I don't annotate books, but there were so many things that I was like, oh, that's really hit me where it hurts. Even though it's about the American medical system, I just felt like this book made sense. I think this goes back to that same thing that I was saying about people with chronic illness understand other people with chronic illness, and understanding that you just can't really get from anywhere else. And it just made so much sense to me, and I really would recommend reading this book if you want to understand more about chronic illness and how it just completely affects people. I don't know. I really enjoyed this book, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars, which is really rare for me in non-fiction, because I don't really read that much non-fiction, and I don't really enjoyed that much non-fiction, but I really, really felt for this one. This just really hit home. Then I read The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. This is like a fantasy version of colonized Africa, and it involves a conscripted soldier sort of returning to her home country and not really fitting in, and not really wanting to fit in because she's been sort of indoctrinated into the colonizers' grasps, and all she knows is like the soldier life. She doesn't have any sort of association with her home country, even though she's come back there and feels like she probably should, but she doesn't really know where she stands. And we also get the point of view of the potential heir to this colonizing kingdom's throne who is visiting this same land, and their perspectives are sort of drawn together. Terrain, the soldier, is a more interesting character to follow, because the way that she is pulled here and there, trying to do the right thing for everybody that she loves, but everybody that she loves is in sort of a really difficult position, because her I forget the word, the crew of soldiers, the people that she is with, regiment? The word anyway, because they are sort of treated like at the bottom of the barrel and they're always the first people to be pushed into the fray. They're kind of like that if they get sacrificed, the colonizing people don't really care. So she is trying her best to protect them because she, at the start of the book, is their lieutenant, and she has connections to people who are in her homeland that she sort of develops throughout the book. And then she also ends up working for Luca, who is the heir to this colonizing kingdom. So she's really being pulled in all directions, and I feel like it was such an interesting thing. Like, nobody in this book ever really makes a right decision, and I kind of loved that. It was really interesting, but it was really hard to read because obviously colonialism and racism is very prevalent in this book. It was really good though. It's also sapphic, but not as sapphic as I thought it was when I was going into this book, because everyone says it's part of like the sapphic trifecta of this, the Jasmine Throne, and She Became the Sun, and I thought it was going to be like more explicitly sapphic, and it was like sideline sapphic, which is sort of happened alongside the plot, which is fine. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I am definitely looking forward to reading the sequel to this. I think it's part of a trilogy, and I know the second book is out. I don't think the third book is out yet though. And then lastly, I picked up Not My Type by Evie Mitchell. This book is about a woman who's a wheelchair user and also a sexologist on a podcast, and she gets a sort of listener question in that says, can you explore accessible rope play for me? And she's like, okay, sure. So she meets up with a friend of a friend and they do accessible rope play. It is very insta-love, and it is very, I want to say surface level. I ended up rating this 3 out of 5 stars, and I think because I found it almost academic in the way that the characters approached things. It was almost like the author was trying to tell you the right way to talk about the things, or the right way to think about the things. So like, this is the right way to approach someone in a wheelchair. It was like a teachable moment, which I think is very good, but I just feel like it could have been incorporated in a more fluid manner, perhaps in the way that people talked or thought about things. I just feel like I was being instructed a little bit. So I kind of lacked that connection. Maybe it would have happened a bit better if it didn't have that insta-love. I'm not the biggest fan of insta-love anyway. I did know that it was going to be insta-love going in, so I kind of expected it, but like, Oh, it turns out I actually gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars, and I can't read my own writing, so that's what I gave it. And yeah, those are all the books that I read in May. I honestly intended to have read more books, but I kept getting migraine. But I still feel quite happy about this. I feel really happy about all of the books that I read that had disability representation in them, and I feel like I didn't have any that were like bad disability representation, which is obviously really good. So I'm happy about that, and I definitely was pushed to read some things that I probably wouldn't have picked up this month, and I'm really grateful for the Spoonies Readathon because that really helped me do that and gave me sort of a direction, and I've picked up some things that I definitely would have put off. The Unbroken would probably still be set on my TBR for another 3 years, like it has been for a while, so I'm really glad that I finally picked that one up, and I'm hoping to continue with that series. So if you made it to this part in the video, then please leave me a lighthouse emoji for the lighthouse in The Secret of Haven Point, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!